those different climates. But going back to UK, London. So we see the videos. We see Tommy Robinson. I have Tommy Robinson on. I know you guys have had your set of back and forth, and I've followed it over the years of what's happened. But what do you think about what Tommy says? Not his background, not any of the criminal stuff, not any of that stuff that maybe you guys have issues with. I'm not trying to do the personal stuff. What do you think about what Tommy is showing when he's going in the streets, having 100,000 people showing up? A lot of people in London finally are coming out saying the Overton window of immigration, not even people in London, the story came out last week, they're even more aggressively anti-immigration than America. They're like, we don't want any.
What's up, everybody? Jackson here, and this Piers Morgan and Patrick Bet-David conversation gets into some of the most contested territory in UK politics right now. Immigration, the rise of Tommy Robinson's marches, and whether concerns about integration have become mainstream or remain fringe. What I found most interesting is that Piers doesn't take an easy side here. He credits Robinson for being early and right about the grooming gang scandal in Northern England, while also drawing a hard line against generalizing an entire religious population based on the actions of extremists. I want to walk through where the specific claims here check out and where the framing deserves more scrutiny. Stick with me, get that like in, get subscribed, because we take apart even the toughest conversations carefully. Now let's get into it.
They're doing your thing, but it's great to sit down together.
Thank you for having me, but also the scale of your empire here is quite something.
Well, thank you. Yeah, most people when they come, they're thinking, and then they see what's going on. It's exciting.
Very impressive.
Yes, and I know you and Vinny, you guys have a very unique bond together. He loves being on the show.
I love him coming on. Vinny has an energy unlike anybody I think I've ever met in my life. And what I love is he just gives it back to everyone that gives it to him. There's no quarter given. But also he's an unpredictable guy. You can't box him in the way that people like to. They try and box him in as you're this and you're that. And he'll often say, actually, I don't think that. I don't think he's an interesting character.
Yeah. Made for TV, period. Made for TV. Every time I see these thumbnails and Vinny's pictures like that, or he's so animated, so you can always pick something. But Piers, I'm trying to see what angle to take with you. So there's a couple. I want to talk to you about, your relationship with the president. I want to talk to you about some of the stuff with Israel that you've hosted. So I think you hosted the first big one with Bassem Youssef came on, that one fiery 30-something million views. And then there was a back and forth. But also with what's going on with London. So right now in U.S., Mamdani just became the mayor of New York City, financial capital of the world. Prior to that, the financial capital of the world was London, right? So you guys had it for 100 years. We had it for 100 years. And when Americans sometimes look at Europe and they look at EU, they're like, wow, look, London's lost. They've lost their identity. Look what's going on to them. And we had Dominic Tarczynski, who was here from Poland. He said, we'll never do what London is doing. We'll never do what EU is doing. What can New Yorkers, if you can give them advice to what look for? You guys have Sadiq Khan. I think he's the first three-term mayor in London ever, right? Muslim guy himself. What happened to London after he came in that New Yorkers can expect?
It's interesting because I think there's been a slight mischaracterization of the comparison between Mamdani and Sadiq Khan. They're both Muslims, but Sadiq Khan is very much a establishment Labour figure in the UK. He's not a progressive woke left guy on many issues. Mamdani is full-on self-acclaimed socialist. That's not Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan, the parallel I said with Mamdani, he keeps winning elections because the opponents they put up against him have been universally useless.
This is Sadiq.
Yeah, so he's had a very easy run. And to be fair to him, he's won re-election twice. Mamdani was up against Cuomo, who I always felt was damaged goods. I felt if you're going to put a moderate up against him who actually was new and fresh and interesting, he probably could have done better, or she could have done better. So Mamdani had a bit of a clean run against a damaged guy, I felt. But there's no doubt this is a seismic moment for New York. I mean, it's the biggest city in America. It's one of the great capital cities of the world. It's, in many ways, the heart of capitalism itself. And here you've got a guy out there not just espousing a socialist philosophy, but it's seemingly utterly determined to try and deliver it. Now, I would say, look, Mr. Mamdani, This is all very well offering everybody everything for free, but there's a reason socialism hasn't worked anywhere in the world for any sustained period of time. At some point, somebody has to pay for this. So who's going to pay for all this? And the answer will be what's happened with the Labour government in the UK. The taxes aren't set by Sadiq. He has a tiny bit of power over local taxation. But the Labour government came in with a thumping majority just over a year ago. Massive, one of the biggest majorities of modern times, a real repudiation of years of very poor rule by the Conservative Party under a series of prime ministers. And they promised all sorts of things. You know, prosperity is coming, hope is coming, all these things. And it's been a complete disaster. And they're now about to unleash a budget in about 3 weeks' time, which they're already setting the stall by is going to be a total U-turn on all their pledges in the election campaign. They said they wouldn't raise income tax. They're going to. They said they wouldn't do this, wouldn't do that. They're going to do it all because they've realized they can't pay for all the promises they made. And I think this is what's going to happen in New York.
How ugly things going to be in New York?
Well, it's going to get very interesting politically, I think, because Mamdani is clearly the most charismatic figure the Democrats have had, really, for a long time, since Obama, you could argue.
Maybe even more charismatic than Obama, if you think about it.
He's more engaging, actually. I think he's more engaging. And look, he's an Arsenal fan like me, a big Arsenal fan. So we have that in common. And it's not that I object to his aspirations. It's just that often with socialists, there's a complete disconnect between the aspiration and the ability to deliver. Now, you know, if we come back in 2 years' time, let's be clear. If Mamdani, within 2 years, manages to deliver on his socialist agenda in a way that is deemed to be successful and popular, massive transformative moment for the Democrats leading into the next general election. I don't think he can. I think the opposite will happen. I think he'll either, like a lot of these guys, once they get power, pivot more to the center ground, or he will try and force through these socialist policies. It won't work, and he will become the stick to beat the Democrats with leading into the next general election. So there's massively high stakes here because the Democrats have nobody else who has any real charisma. Nobody. And in fact, the most charismatic people on the left in America right now, you could argue, are Mamdani, AOC, and Bernie Sanders. So you've got a bunch of socialists dominating the news cycle for them.
Yeah, and what do you do with that, right, when you're seeing that part taking place? Because, you know, on the other side, Nancy Pelosi stepping down, Newsom, you hear that voice coming up, and you're an interesting place because you do business in New York, you have a property, I believe, in L.A., you're in London, you're going back and forth, so you kind of are able to, you know, compare all those different climates. But going back to UK, London, so we see the videos. We see Tommy Robinson. I have Tommy Robinson on. I know you guys have had your set of back and forth, and I've followed it over the years of what's happened. But what do you think about what Tommy says? Not his background, not any of the criminal stuff, not any of that stuff that maybe you guys have issues with. I'm not trying to do the personal stuff. What do you think about what Tommy is showing when he's going in the streets, having 100,000 people showing up? A lot of people in London finally are coming out saying the Overton window of immigration, not even people in London, the story came out last week, they're even more aggressively anti-immigration than America. They're like, we don't want any more of this. For you, somebody who is from there, what have you noticed the changes in London since Muslims started entering decades ago?
Well, I think it's the problem has been massively exaggerated. However, there is a rising problem. That's how I would categorize it myself. Tommy Robinson resonates with people because of two things, I think. One, he was absolutely right about the grooming gang scandal in the north of England. It was a horrendous scandal involving almost exclusively British Pakistani men abusing young white English girls. That was the scandal, and it was going on for years. It was horrific. These girls were being appallingly abused by a particular section of the community. But nobody dared say what that community was because they were trapped in woke ideology that you can't name a criminal if it doesn't suit the woke agenda. And so Tommy Robinson was one of those people that early on began calling this out, and he was right to do so, and he deserves credit for doing it. Mainstream media weren't completely oblivious. One guy on the Times actually exposed it originally and kept banging that drum. But many people in the establishment in the UK conspired to cover it up. They didn't want this. They thought it would be too much of a powder keg to say what actually happened, which is this was British Pakistani men abusing white English girls. That was it. And they should have been clear with what was going on. So Tommy Robinson deserves credit for that. Let's not get into his background. I have my issues about it. I have my issues about some of the sanitization of who he is when he comes on American shows, because he tends to, I think, be very disingenuous. But park all that. Why is he also gathering momentum now with his marches, which used to be, really a bunch of thugs running around, attacking police and so on. But it's morphed into a much bigger number of people. Many of them are completely peaceful. Many of them share his concerns about immigration failures, in terms of policy failures in the country for decades now. And again, on that specific, he's right. And the reason he's right is you can go back to really, it's interesting that I think the way this has played out. Tony Blair in the early 2000s opened the floodgates on immigration, but to Eastern Europe. And so we suddenly had a massive influx of people from Eastern Europe into the UK. And this was deemed to be a good thing, and then it became a thing that was slightly out of control. And then generally, immigration seemed to spiral out of control, both legal and illegal. We started getting this problem on the boats coming over from France. It's now up to 50, 60,000 people a year are coming in illegally on these small boats. No one appears to have any idea how to stop this happening. But more damagingly, 2 years ago, we had a net migration in the UK of legal migration of nearly 1 million people. Now, to put it in context, we only have just under 70 million people in the UK. You bring in 1 million people a year legally and add them to the already creaking infrastructure. We have our much vaunted national health system, the NHS, was designed in the 50s for a population of 50 million. We now have a population of nearly 70 million. So comparative to America, we're a fifth of the size, but in comparison to where we were in the 50s, we are massively bigger population. The strain on all of our infrastructure, all our public services, has been getting worse and worse and worse in direct correlation to the size of our population. And that is what's been fueling a lot of the anger. A lot of people, add the pandemic, add the cost of living crisis, so add years of really tough times for a lot of people, particularly working class people in Britain. And they see a lot of people coming in either illegally or with the blessing of the state, with many dependents. And they see with the illegal migrants coming over on the southern border, they get put in 3-4-star hotels. They get treated way better than the way that many people are living their lives who are in the country illegally already. And it causes a lot of resentment. Then you add inevitably, when you get these kind of numbers coming in, that you're going to get migrants committing crimes. And when they do, this becomes a hugely inflammatory thing. So again, on that aspect of it all, Robinson is correct.
So if you look at this number, this is estimated Muslim population in UK by percentage from 83 till today. I'm sure you've seen this, 500,000 in 83, 1%. And then it cracked 1 million in 97, 14 years later, and then 2 million, and then 4 million, and then 4.5, some say 5 million today, 6-7% of the population. You have flirted with the concept of wanting to run for prime minister. I heard, whether you're joking or you're being serious, if there is a crazy personality that could pull it off, you probably have the personality to pull it off. But let's just say you do say, you know what, I'm going to get in there and I'm being hired as a, true, strategic, or I'm going to run for this. Do you think this growth, the way it's going right now, getting to 10, 20, 30%, do you think it is a good idea to keep allowing people to come in to combine the Islam way of thinking, what their ideas are, and coexist with the Western ideology?
Well, I think there are issues which are serious to be considered. For example, it's been reported there are as many as potentially 85 unofficial Sharia courts in the UK now, which are not operating under UK law. They're operating in their own law for their own communities. That clearly is not a good thing in a country like the UK. I would say, look, we have a very high Muslim population now, comparative percentage-wise to the United States. In fact, I think we're not far off in terms of total numbers to the whole of America. So we have a lot of Muslims who live in the UK. We've always been a very multicultural, very tolerant place. That's why people want to come and live there, a bit like America. I would say the vast majority, I've said this before and I say it again, the vast majority of Muslims living in the UK have assimilated perfectly well and live perfectly peaceful and lives which contribute to society. The problem is, I think, coming with the sheer volume of people coming in and the sheer volume coming in illegally as well, where, as you've had in the United States, people have actually no idea who these people really are, how radicalized they may be, what their plans may be when they get to the United Kingdom. And then you see the quite disturbing spectacle of protests, say, in London during the Israel-Hamas war, where people are brazenly supporting Hamas in these protests. And, Hamas is a prescribed terror group in the United Kingdom. That should be not happening. So there is a rising concern, which Robinson has tapped into, and some would say, his critics would say, he's fueled it for his own devices, but he's tapped into a genuine concern. And the worrying thing for the government should be that as their popularity plunges, the popularity of people like Robinson and like the Reform Party under Nigel Farage, although those two don't get on, you're seeing a rising sentiment in the UK that we're losing our identity as a country. And what should we do about that? Whilst preserving the UK's historic position of being a welcoming, tolerant country, proudly multicultural, how do you juggle that with the sheer volume of people coming in and the impact that's having on local communities? And how do you stop communities developing within communities? In other words, how do you stop the fragmentation of our society where you have little separate worlds developing in all major cities and towns? These are genuine concerns. And for people in the old days, these used to be shut down, these conversations, by people saying, well, you're racist. We're long past that stage. People now openly talk about this in UK on political shows and so on. And you're no longer just labelled a racist if you express concern about immigration. Everybody feels that this is getting unsustainable. So the question is, what do we do about it?
So you have how many kids? You have four kids? Okay.
Yeah.
So 4 kids, but they're grown, right? They're grown. They're
32 down to 13.
Okay. So you do have a 13-year-old.
13-year-old, yeah.
Okay. And then what's the oldest after 13?
32.
Okay.
Oh, well, my youngest boy is 24, then 28,
24,
and 32.
so 13. If you were to start all over again, okay, and you're 25 today, and you're capable, meaning you shine on camera, you're very comfortable being under the fire, that's your comfort zone, you're going to go make money no matter where you go, here, any other country. Would you choose to raise your 4 kids where you're at, or would you move out of the country?
I would, and I would remind people we've been through a lot more difficult times than this. I think a lot gets amplified by social media, and that can be a very good thing or a very bad thing. My grandmother was 19 at the start of World War II, and she was 25 when it ended. As she always said to me, I lost 6 of the best years of my life. She said, however, I then went from 25 to 94 and had a brilliant 70 years after that. So imagine living through World War II. Imagine the kind of conversations you and I would have been having about that, about the impending threat of Nazi domination, of Nazis taking over the UK. We've faced bigger challenges than this. This is a challenge that's come, in my opinion, across the whole of Europe. The sweeping migration, much of it coming from countries that have been at war, whether it's Syria, Iraq, or wherever it may be. But you've had millions and millions and millions of people deposed from their homes or fleeing war-torn situations and sweeping across the continent of Europe and wanting a better life for their families, which I completely understand. But it has got unsustainable. And it's not just a problem for the UK, it's a problem for Germany, for France, for many of the European countries. They're all facing the same challenges. Nobody at the moment, it seems to me, has a clear idea of what we do about this, other than I look at somewhere like the United States. I look at the way Donald Trump just slammed the brakes on the southern border almost instantaneously and reduced the number of people coming in from 2.5 million a year to literally a couple of thousand a month, right? And you look at that and you think, well, okay, you can control borders. You just have to have the determination to do it. I also think Trump has universal support in America when he says that anyone who's here illegally in the United States who then commits a crime outside of their immigration status should be deported. Where the flashpoint comes, and where it's an interesting thing as to whether other countries like the UK follow the Trump philosophy on this, is where you start deporting people who have been here for a number of years illegally, but who have been maybe working, paying taxes, contributing to society, bringing up kids and so on. What do you do with those people? I understand that they want to create an atmosphere of you have to come in legally, and if you don't, then you can't stay here. I understand that, but you don't want America to lose its inherent sense of compassion and empathy either. And I think some of the images for me of ICE running into Home Depot and grabbing people who are undocumented and wanting to throw them out, living in LA as I do a lot of the time, the fear that's engendered amongst the community in LA is it's not a good thing. So I think there's a balance to be struck here, albeit you cannot look at Trump's overall immigration policy and not think it's been extremely effective so far. And you've got to look at the hypocrisy of the left when they go after Trump. It's like my favorite question for my lefty friends, my liberal woke friends. And I used to identify happily as liberal. I just find nothing in common with these people. But I say to them, how many people did Barack Obama deport in 8 years as president? They never know, for one. They can tell exactly how many Trump has, but they never know how many Obama did. And then I tell them it's 3 million people. Just Google it. You can Google it. So A, they don't want to know. B, when they find out, they're completely shocked. C, I said he was known as deporter-in-chief in Mexico. Right? That was his nickname.
That's right.
Right? This guy deported more people pro rata per year than any president in the history of the United States. And yet the same rules do not apply to Obama than do to people like Trump. So, I think there's a lot to learn from the way Trump's gone about it, albeit with some caveats.
Yeah. So you said something about your grandma being 19 to 25 during the war. I lost 6 of my best years, but I lived to 94, 70 years, some of the greatest years of my life, right? Okay. When you had to overcome that war, you had this one guy named Winston Churchill, right? So just curious. You're saying, Muslims that come in and they assimilate, great, no problem. I don't have any problem. We have Muslims in our company that we work with, and they've assimilated. They love America, right? If you ask the Muslim Council of Britain, it'll say that 75% of Muslims in Britain have assimilated and see themselves as Brits.
Yeah.
I'm a Brit. I consider myself proud Brit as well, but 25% don't, depending on the numbers you look at. How would Winston Churchill today, would Winston Churchill be tolerant with the borders? Would he be like, yeah, it's okay, let him come in?
No,
would he handle the threat? And think about how his wiring was. This is your world.
Yeah.
What do you think he would have done today?
No, I think he'd have been tough. I think he'd have been
In what way?
Well, I think he'd have been very protective of our borders in a way that was very protective against the threat of Nazism to our way of life. I think that he would have understood inherently, that actually having open borders, as Ronald Reagan said, right? The best line ever was the simplest one. If you have an open border, you don't have a country. Of course you don't. The very definition of a country is something that has a border. So the moment you allow your border to be completely open, you're just going to be a hostage to your own misfortune. And that's what we're seeing happening. Again, it's a big problem for the continent of Europe. It's not just a problem for the UK. The difference we have is twofold. One, we're an island, the United Kingdom. And secondly, we're detached from the European Union, not just geographically, but financially and every other way now through leaving the EU, through Brexit. So, we haven't got a lot of friends in France, for example. They don't really that bothered about helping us with the small boats crisis, because why should they help us at all, given the pain we inflicted on them by leaving the EU? So there's a lot of that going on. But they've all got their own problems. I was in Paris recently, and you could say, I think you could be fair to say, Paris is a very different place when you walk around to what it was like 30 years ago. I know. My wife is half Parisian, was born and raised there. And so you see it changing. Now, I've got no problem. America's the classic example of a country where every city you go to, you'll meet myriad people from myriad different countries, myriad different backgrounds, and so on. And the United States is a great example of how this can work. But you have to have control of your borders, and you have to have a sensible, tough immigration policy. The irony for me is, when you try and become like I have, I'm a exceptional alien is my status on my visa status for the United States. I always laugh. They literally call you aliens. And my visa is pegged to my work, and I'm here as an... So, I'm a little bit perturbed that I have to be called an alien, but the fact they call me an exceptional alien, I'll take it.
Respect.
Yeah, but the amount of paperwork and money you have to spend on getting through your visa immigration status each time I have to renew it is indicative of a country that does apply these rules. And the reason that people get so angry about those who circumnavigate the rules is a lot of them have had to do the same. And if you go through the proper process to go into a country legally or to set up your home there with your family, whatever it may be, obviously you're going to really resent people who wash up on a small boat, who might be criminals, You've no idea, because the UK government has no idea, by the way, who's on these boats, for example. We found in one purge that 30% one year all came from Albania, which is not a war-torn country. It's a country in Eastern Europe, but there's a lot of gangs. And these were gang members coming into the UK, predominantly the major cities, to deal in things like drugs. So they did a deal with the Albanians and it stopped that stone dead. But now we have people coming in from other countries. So there's
what would Churchill have done? What do you think he would have done?
I think what would he have done?
Seriously, what do you think he would have done? Just think his profile.
I certainly think right now he would have put the clamps down on more people coming
would
in.
He have
except
sent,
in exceptional circumstances.
Would he have sent anybody back from the 7% that came here? How would he have treated some of the criminals? How would he have treated some of the some of the stuff that's going on?
So I would say he certainly wouldn't have just picked out the Muslim community. We have a lot of different communities. Like I said, the grooming gang scandal in America was very high profile and attracted a lot of heat, obviously. But we have a lot of different religions, nationalities living in the UK. I don't think he would have singled out Muslims. I think what he would have taken a more pragmatic view and gone, we have too many people in this country now. There's too much pressure on our public services. Some people are going to have to leave. Who are those people? Well, anyone who commits a crime, who's come in here to this country legally but commits a crime, should be deported. I think most people feel that. And then you've got to stop the people coming in illegally. What is the most effective way of doing that? No one's had a good plan so far. The Conservative Party boasts about their Rwanda plan, but it was so ridiculous. It was like a tiny handful of people would have ever got on those planes to Rwanda. It was never going to work in the way they kept trying to promise it would. So what is the most effective way to do it? I actually think that if Trump was in charge, for example, he'd probably say to Emmanuel Macron, if you don't stop these boats leaving your shores, because it has to be done at the French end, then we're going to tariff you 1,000% on your wine and cheese coming into the UK. He would have taken a brutal move like that.
Why are they not doing that right now?
I don't know. I don't know why they're not so tougher on the French. You've got to do a deal with the French on this. You've got to say, look, sorry, you're letting all these people get on these boats. Once they're at sea, there's hardly any way to stop them. And then once they wash up on our shore, they are legally allowed to remain as potential asylum seekers.
Is it fear? Is it something you guys need from them? Is it something? Is it a history of
Do you know what it is, Patrick? It's tough leadership. Churchill was a very flawed character in many ways. He was a big smoker, big drinker. He said some pretty ugly things over the years about people, all of these things. But he was also brilliantly talented, an amazing writer, a painter, a musician, also an incredibly complex, talented, brilliant man. But when it came to our biggest ever challenge of facing the threat of Nazism, he was the one who stood up and convinced the British public we can beat these people when nobody else thought we could. And for that alone, he's my greatest ever Briton, albeit like all my great Britons and all my great favourite people, flawed, right? But I think we need a strong, probably flawed character to come forward and go, right, we have this problem. What are we going to do about it? Let's have a proper open debate where people who contribute are not immediately branded racist if they think we have too many people in the country and too many people coming in both legally and illegally. What are we going to do about this? And stop putting people who come in illegally in very luxurious hotel accommodation, which enrages local communities who are living in far lower standards of living.
Who are some names? Who are some names? Because remember, Roger Stone was the first guy that looked at Trump and said, that you hear the stories where it's like, this guy's going to be the president one day. You can be the president one day. You can go become president one day, right? And Trump's like, nah, I'm a business guy. I'm doing what I'm doing. Who are some names that you say they would have the brass and the balls to go out there and put their foot down?
Here's the problem. I don't really see the person. I'll tell you why I don't think I see that person. We now have a very mediocre tier of politicians in the United Kingdom. All the smart ones who've been genuinely successful in their own lives, they don't want to poke their head into the political arena. It's become too toxic, too damaging. You tend to get absolutely fried for every peccadillo you've ever done in your entire life. Nobody who's got probably the smarts and has been a success themselves wants to do it. So you're left with a mediocre, it's like being in any company and suddenly a sort of lower ranking, lower middle management team suddenly run the company. Well, there's a reason they're lower ranking middle managers in most cases. They're not as capable as the ones actually running the company. I feel like that about a political class in the UK.
Yeah.
They're just across all the parties, there is a paucity of people that I think have the drive and the smarts to do this. Nigel Farage's Reform Party are getting a lot of traction, I think, by default, because the others are so useless. But even he, when I listen to his economic policies, they don't make any sense, right? He's basically a bit of a one-trick pony. He's strong on immigration, albeit I'm not entirely sure he's got the answers. But I hear him on the economy. I think you could be left-wing. So this is a problem. We've got to get back to attracting the best of the best to want to come in to run the country.
Would you be okay with a Muslim prime minister of UK?
Yeah.
You'd be okay. That wouldn't do anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's your concern isn't that at all?
No, not at all. No, listen, I don't want to radicalize Muslim running the country. I don't want to radicalize anything running the country. There's a lot of radicalized elements of all religions, of all nationalities. I don't like anyone who's radicalized. It's dangerous for any country to have people at the helm who are radicalized. Do I think we have a particular problem in the UK with radicalized Muslims? I'm not convinced by that. I think there are radicalized Muslims, and clearly the Muslim population is rising exponentially fast compared to other populations. So we are going to have to look at this and say, well, what do we do about this going forward in a way that you don't look like you're just picking on people because of their Muslim faith?
I respect the tolerance that you have of what could happen to Brit long term, because I think sometimes when you're in it and it's gradual, like the whole thing about you put a frog in a boiling water and you boil it slowly, and then boom, he's dead. It's too late, right? I think sometimes when people are in it, they're like, yeah, well, it's okay with this, it's okay with that, it's okay with this. I think UK is flirting with being tolerant, and it'd be interesting to see who would rise up and want to do something about it.
Well, look, I go to a lot of Muslim countries. I've been in Saudi Arabia. I've been in
To me,
Qatar.
the biggest thing is the extremists. It's not a...
No, exactly. Here's my point, though. But also, they have zero tolerance of people wanting to operate under their own laws when they go to those countries. For example, so the whole debate about Sharia law and so on, I can understand why a lot of Brits get exercised about that, because if I went to Saudi Arabia or Qatar or somewhere and decided I would ignore the country's laws and operate under my own laws while I was there, you wouldn't get away with it for very long.
So why would you be okay with that? Why would you be okay with that?
Well, I wouldn't.
No, but what I'm saying is, so if you were okay with somebody who's a Muslim to become a prime minister, and then say they're the noble one, right? And they're coming in, they actually love Britain. But it opens it up, and an extremist like, I'm going to get in. Then they come in and they say, hey, Sharia law, what are you going to do about it? Then what? Because you're making it a step ahead.
Yeah, but I don't think you can't tar the entire Muslim population with the brush of potential extremism.
Let's start with the grooming gang scandal, because it's the most historically significant and well-documented piece of this conversation. The organized sexual abuse of young girls, predominantly by networks of British Pakistani men in towns across northern India, is a real, extensively investigated scandal, and it's well documented that various local authorities and institutions failed to act on it for years, in part out of fear of being seen as targeting a specific ethnic community. That failure to act has been the subject of official inquiries and is not seriously disputed. Whether Tommy Robinson specifically deserves primary credit for exposing it, as opposed to journalists and local reporting that predated his involvement, is a narrower question, worth checking directly, since Piers himself noted that Times journalist had been pursuing the story independently. On the specific immigration figures cited, a claim of legal net migration to the UK reaching nearly 1 million people in a single recent year, and illegal channel crossings in the range of 50,000 to 60,000 annually. Those are the kind of specific government statistics worth verifying directly against the Office for National Statistics and Home Office data, since these numbers get cited constantly across the political spectrum, and it's worth confirming the current precise figures rather than taking any single conversation's numbers as final. The core philosophical disagreement in this conversation is actually a well-structured one, and it's worth naming clearly. Piers draws a consistent distinction between extremism, which he says exists across every religion and nationality, and the broader population of a given faith or background, arguing you can't fairly hold an entire religious community responsible for the actions of a radicalized minority. He applies that same logic to Christian extremism in America, which is a fair, consistent standard rather than a special pardon for one group. Patrick's pushback essentially asking what happens if extremists gain influence through legitimate democratic means, like a Muslim political leader who a population initially trusts, is a fair hypothetical to raise. But it's worth noting that this same hypothetical concern could be raised about any political or religious group gaining influence and later shifting toward extremism. It isn't unique to one faith. On the comparison Patrick draws to Japanese visitors cleaning up stadiums as a stand-in for cultural compatibility, that's an anecdote about a specific cultural behavior, not a rigorous argument about integration outcomes broadly. And it's worth being cautious about drawing sweeping conclusions about entire national or religious populations from single anecdotes, however charming they are. Piers' point about infrastructure strain, specifically that the National Health Service was designed for a UK population significantly smaller than it is today, is a real and legitimate policy concern, independent of any question about who is immigrating or why. Infrastructure capacity versus population growth is a straightforward planning problem that applies regardless of where population growth comes from, whether through immigration or a rising birth rate. And it's worth evaluating on those terms rather than folding it entirely into a debate about a specific group. Here's what I'd leave you with. The most useful thing in this whole exchange is the distinction Piers keeps returning to between naming a real, documented failure, like the grooming gang scandal, honestly, and generalizing an entire faith community based on it. Those are different acts, and conflating them makes it harder to actually fix the specific institutional failures that let a real scandal go unaddressed for years. So tell me, do you think it's possible to hold the specific documented failure to account without it sliding into broader generalizations about an entire community? Or does that distinction inevitably blur in practice? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more of these careful breakdowns of contested topics, get subscribed, because that's exactly what this channel is here for.